Hi, Chris. Can you see me? Great. Hi, Reginald.
Can see you. Yeah. And I can,
Hello.
yep, there you go.
Okay, it is 6 p.m. I know I visited with Budget Director Paul Payne about 15 minutes ago just to see if he had everything he needed to access this. I'm going to shoot him a quick message and just see if everything's going okay. Has anybody heard from Commissioner Dwight? No? Okay. I'll shoot him a quick message too. Okay, I see Budget Director Paul Payne has joined us. I'm going to promote him to panelist. And there he is. Paul, I've just sent the other working group member, one of the other working group members rather, Commissioner David Dwight, a message to see if he's going to be joining us. We'll give him another minute or two and just monitor for additional attendees. And if he's not able to join in or we don't hear from him, we'll just go ahead and get started and let you well, we'll just go ahead and get started, and I'll just do a little high level overview since this meeting is being recorded for anyone who watches it in the future about just the goal of tonight's conversation. There were some questions that were put together in advance, so we'll kind of do a quick run through of those to start with, and then we'll see if there's any other questions or commentary that people may have to contribute. And yeah, so we'll just hang out for another minute or so and we'll get things underway. While we're waiting, Commissioners Grant and Garth, do you guys just want to give a little bit of your background so Paul knows how you got to be on the commission and just some of your, yeah, just your background and things like that?
Sure, I'll start. My name is Chris Grant. I'm a resident, 20-year resident of the city. I live in South City. Um, and I am a union side labor attorney and represent workers and labor unions. And was appointed by to the commission by Alderperson Velasquez.
Hello, Director Payne, again for the what's this now? The umpteenth time? I forget. We've known each other for quite some time. You know who I am, Reginald Garth. I was appointed by Rasheen Alderman Aldridge. Of course, you know I work just a couple of floors down from you and around the corner, around the way. So we both work in the fields of finance and whatnot. So hey, good meeting you.
Well, thank you for that, Commissioner Garth. And we will, Commissioner Dwight, I don't know if you're able to, I know that you're somewhat en route right now, so won't be able to join us on camera for the time being. Didn't know if you're in a position to just share a little bit about your background, how you got to the commission, and if not, just don't say anything or unmute for the next few seconds, and we'll sit here awkwardly in silence and wait. Okay, there's our answer. All right. Well, we will go ahead then and get started. So this working group's purview is pretty broad. We have a lot of different departments under our purview, but we also have the financial apparatuses of the city, or the charter provisions that pertain to the financial apparatuses and processes of the city under our purview. And previous working groups meetings have raised a need for just some additional information, or the benefit of having additional information about, among other processes, the budget process in the city, you know, rule of E&A and how that works. And so Paul Payne, the city's budget director, is here with us tonight. So thank you very much, Paul, for joining with us. I sent over just a list of some draft questions that the working group have put together. Some of these came from our prior meetings. Some were suggested by commissioners in addition to those. So we can just go ahead and get started by working our way through those questions, and then we can see at the end if any other questions emerge or follow-up questions emerge, things like that. So let's go ahead and get started. So first and foremost, what is the role of your office in city government?
Okay. Well, thank you, Casey, and nice to meet you all as well. What I was going to do is I've got some documents I can pull up on screen, so I was going to share the screen here, if I could, just to put some context. Hopefully that came up. This is the organizational chart for the city. And just to let you know, so yeah, as Casey mentioned, I'm the budget director for the city of St. Louis, and the budget director reports to the three-member board of estimate apportionment comprised of the mayor, the comptroller, and the president of the board. And so what we are charged with, and I am charged with as budget director, is compiling the budget for the city each year. And if I could switch now to budget process, let's see here. It's pulled up. I'm using the website, so anyone who's interested in that could also do the same steps. I don't know if that's coming up. Is everything coming up now? Okay, good.
It is. Yep.
Okay, great. And so I'm going to be clicking on this budget process here. So it's basically a description of the budget process itself. So as I mentioned, we're charged with presenting the budget and compiling the budget each year, as well as tracking the budget during the year. So just to give you an idea, the budget process begins in the fall when the budget division issues a request for departmental revenue estimates. We're pretty much coming up on that process where the fiscal year went from July 1 to June 30th. And so we're in that cycle where we're in the second month of the second quarter. So we're about to, at the end of December, we'll be at the midpoint of the fiscal year. And that's the point in time where we start thinking about the coming fiscal year, which we refer to as fiscal 25. It's 24-25 technically. So what we will be doing at that point is I'll be assessing for the second quarter revenues, how revenues are tracking for the current fiscal year, and making estimates for the coming fiscal year of what we can anticipate on the revenue side. That involves reaching out to the city departments about how they're collecting revenues and other things, as well as reaching out to them for any capital needs or any new initiatives that we would need to be aware of, or any changes in their operations that we need to be aware of, so that we need to incorporate that in any sort of planning for the coming fiscal year from an expenditure standpoint. With that preliminary information, sometime around the third week of January or so, we issue preliminary budget allocations. So that's taking a look at what we estimate for revenue and that preliminary estimate, as well as what we anticipate to be increases. And some of these are estimates at the time, but it gives us an idea about what sort of gives some sort of parameters for the budget, for the departments to be reviewing their budgets and submitting requests. And so after that process starts, they typically are given a few weeks, and then they submit their requests, and then around mid-February or the later part of the month with their request for what they think they're going to be needing for the current coming fiscal year.
And so, Paul, is that process there? That's just, is that by ordinance, or is that just by practice, or
that's
what?
By practice? That's not ordinance. And I've broken this project process into two steps, into two pieces. One is the process by practice, and then there's others that are very specific by charter. And I'll get into those for a second in a minute. So while we go through the process of reviewing those requests and by departments and all, and we meet with them, and believe it or not, sometimes departments request more than what they've been allocated. And so it requires a lot of give and take and back and forth on some of the causes and things. In the meantime, we're in the third quarter of the fiscal year. I'm reviewing revenues and such to come up with any revisions to revenue estimates as that year progresses. So that by April, we can come up with a budget estimate and both recommendations for expenses and revenues for the coming fiscal year. Now, when it comes to the charter, the charter requirements, as you can see in the provisions of the charter, is that the Board of E&A must recommend a budget to the Board of Aldermen 60 days prior to the start of the fiscal year, or typically by May 1st. And so what they typically do is we'll make that recommendation in April. They'll have a hearing or two in the latter part of April, reviewing the recommendations and make any amendments at that point, so that we can get together and get a full recommendation to the Board of Aldermen by May 1st deadline. And so once the Board of Aldermen gets the recommendation, it introduces that as a bill, and then through that process, it recommends that it goes to the committee, which is now what used to be Ways and Means, now the Budget and Public Employees Committee, and they begin their series of hearings with the various departments, whoever they want to talk to, and as well as public hearings when they want to hear from the public as well, on various aspects of the budget. Now, under the charter, as I mentioned, the Board of Aldermen has 60 days for that review process, at which point that requires them, they can reduce anything within the budget, but if they seek an increase, then they go back to the Board of E&A and sort of negotiate with the Board of E&A. And if the board now, after results of these processes where they have the hearings, any negotiating with the E&A, they come back. They are required to have a recommended budget by the end of June, or the first day of July, actually. And if they've not done so, then the budget that is submitted by E&A it becomes budget, and if not, and if E&A doesn't act, then whatever requirements I've submitted to the board then become that. So basically, what the charter did, and this was actually one of the better reforms we've done in the last. I always say it's probably one of the best reforms we've done in the last 30 years that I can think of. Is one, it makes sure that one, we have a balanced budget, and two, that budget will be passed by July 1st. Because I remember I've been with the city for over 35 years now. I just came in after that charter amendment was passed, and I remember seeing a newspaper article describing the Ways and Means Committee at the time still arguing over the budget. It was around Thanksgiving. So that's the kind of thing that was going on prior to this. And it's basically solved that problem by saying, okay, and this is very important for anytime you're meeting with the rating agencies. I can always assure them, yes, we will have a budget by July 1 and it will be balanced. So that's a very important aspect of this, that reform effort that was passed. Now, in terms of once the budget is passed, what kind of changes could there be? Now, throughout the fiscal year, there is the ability to, for instance, the department, let's say they put $10,000 in a supply account and they really need it for materials or whatever, or something else. There's a provision that allows for budgetary transfers that they can recommend, and then they submit requests to Board of E&A. If it's from one account group to another, or from personnel account to something else that requires E&A. If it's a technical type of a transfer, in other words, from an office supply to a computer supply, it's not a big deal, right? So that's more of a technical thing where I say, hey, I as budget director and the comptroller can sign off on those, just to make sure that it's technically correct and the funds are there and everything like that. And then, of course, and this hasn't happened often, but if there are new revenues throughout the fiscal year that weren't budgeted, then you can say, hey, we can do a supplemental appropriation. That could happen as well. That I think at one point when there was for instance, I think when one of the sales taxes was approved in mid-year, there was a supplemental to appropriate those funds. That can be done separately as well, but that's through another ordinance process. So there are changes. So there are variations and changes you can make during the fiscal year to amend the budget. And then, of course, our role in the budget division is to track the budget once it's passed as it goes forward. And as I mentioned, we are in the second quarter now to track, make sure things are on track, and if we need to take any remedial steps. Fortunately, we've had some good budget years the last couple of years, but as I tell people, I've been through 4 recessions, and sometimes when you go through I just remember the 2008, 2009 recession when you could immediately see we're in trouble. We got to take some steps to fix the budget. Right after the first quarter, you see revenues just sort of tanking, and then it's more of going out to departments saying, hey, look, we'd like you to not spend these certain amounts and all. And then and I remember also we went back to the Board of Aldermen and got some reversions from the capital funds and stuff like that in order to bridge some of those gaps. I don't know if you remember how bad there was COVID, but even before that, the 2008, 2009 recession was pretty severe, and it took a lot of remedial steps and amendments to the budget that year on the downward side to try to mitigate the shortfall there. So and then there's I can just show you that's just sort of an illustration of the time frame starting in January, ending in July, of what the budget process is. So that's pretty much in a nutshell how it works. But like I said, a lot of this was addressed in that reform effort back in, I think it was passed by voters in '87, which incorporated a lot of these changes. And again, I have to say that it corrected a lot of problems that the city was dealing with before then.
Thank you so much for that, Paul. Yeah, I know there was one of the questions that was raised in an earlier commission meeting was, how does your office engage with the mayor's office, the comptroller's office, and the Board of Aldermen throughout this budget process? Because obviously everyone's involved. That's, the Board of Estimate and Apportionment. Can you talk a little bit about the various points of contact and how that works?
Sure. Remember when I mentioned that once we issue budget allocations, we start getting budget requests back from departments. we'll submit those requests. As I mentioned, there's always a need to reconcile what we have available versus what is being requested from the department. So we'll have sit-down meetings. And I'll get this last year as an example. We'll invite, typically we'll work more closely, particularly since most of the departments work for the mayors, at least those that are appointed, we'll have a mayor's rep. Usually it would be Nancy Cross or someone sitting in the meetings. But I also invited this past year, because it was the first year, someone from Megan Green's office to participate, and just to get a feel for what's going on in terms of what's being requested. The comptroller's office is usually more interested on the finance side in terms of if there's any debt issuances and things like that, but they are made aware of anything of any major event that would occur that might affect their office as well. But that, in terms of engaging E&A in that process, that's typically how that works. It's that, okay, this is what we're expecting, trying to come up with a balanced budget. So as I mentioned, most times requests exceed what we've allocated in terms of resources. So the idea there is to try to get, okay, what are the pressure points? What's really important? Trying to establish what the priorities are from the E&A members at that point, so that at least those are given a higher priority in terms of because something's going to have to come out of those requests in order to maintain a balanced budget. And so that's sort of how we engage there. Once it goes to E&A, then they have it before them. They may have some additional amendments at that point, and which we will incorporate into the budget as much as we can in order to get it to the Board of Aldermen. But once it goes to the Board of Aldermen, the engagement then flips to mostly through presentation and then discussions with members of the Budget and Employees Committee. Once they start their hearings, helping facilitate those meetings, making sure that their questions are answered, any materials that they need at the time, that we can get and respond to them, any questions they have regarding the budget, any details, supporting documents that they have or need. We do almost all our budgets through every part of this process get posted online on the website after each stage. So when we present to the Board of E&A, you can be sure, hey, you can find those same documents on the website. When that document gets amended and gets submitted to the Board of Aldermen, that document gets posted. Those documents get posted on the website, so everyone's seeing what's being done, and we have a list of amendments. But it's basically being available to the Board of Aldermen and members of the committee at that point, so that we can address any questions they have, so that when they proceed to any of their amendments, they'll have the information they need. And then once it goes, and typically what happens is in the E&A meeting in June, they'll have some list of recommended, may have some reductions. This year they didn't do reductions, but they did do increases. And so the increases are something they present to E&A and say, hey, we'd like you to consider these increases as well. And so this year there wasn't any, it wasn't a give and take. Basically, E&A went with whatever they submitted. But in given years, it could be give and take back and forth. Say, hey, we were able to accommodate some of these, but not all of these. But I think the process it sort of legislates engagement in that way, and that's what's occurred. And so that's what the whole idea is. And from our role is to assist with that process so that you can get what we need to get done by the July 1st deadline.
And so a few points of clarification, those increases, they were increases requested by the Board of Aldermen that the Board of Estimate and Apportionment then considered, or specifically the Budget and Public Employees Committee requested and then presented to the Board of Estimate and Apportionment.
Yes, typically what happens is the budget and that's hard. I used to say Ways and Means like that, but now it's Budget and Public Employees Committee. They'll meet and they'll make recommendations. Now those recommendations can be cuts and adds. Now the adds need to go back to E&A for approval, so they'll suspend their hearings to get E&A to concur with whatever they have requested. That occurred this year, and there were some requested increases. E&A met in June, considered those increases, approved them. Then it got sent back to the Budget Committee, and then they proceeded to vote the budget out to the full Board of Aldermen at that point.
Got it. And then in terms of the, you mentioned the documents that are, made available as part, through the ENA process that are made available to the Budget and Public Employees Committee. Can you talk a little bit about the information that people can find in it? We have a few members of the public who are in attendance. What's contained in, the information that, your office compiles as part of the budget process that, citizens can find online? Is it just, here's what we're doing with departments, is it revenue projections? What all can they find in there?
Yeah, let me, I'll share the screen again for that one because I just pulled up. Can you see, I'll see that. This is,
Yes.
This is again, the Budget Division website. And we have a special box for all of this. And so basically you've got these are all the documents related to the FY24 budget. What we call the annual operating plan, and I can click on that and you open it up. But basically, that's got a lot of the narrative, a lot of the overviews, summaries, a discussion of the budget, and it goes by department here. You can download the full document, or just whatever department you like. But there's a lot of narrative in there talking about what the highlights are, and any particular changes, and all sorts of just background information on the budget. It also goes summarize the versions of the budget. So you got general government, and here we are, Board of Aldermen. All of this is summary information of the budget, both budget as well as the number of personnel and such like that. We've also got revenue charts and things in that nature. In the appendix of this document, we've got discussions about debt and the budget process and other supporting documents. So that's what we call the annual operating plan. And that's that first document you see in the box there. Now, the line item detail, which everyone likes to look at because it's got more of the meat of the budget itself, that's actually, it's somewhat a dry document, but it has, as I mentioned, budget summaries in it, just raw numbers. And it's got a summary by fund and department. We have various funds in the department, in the city budget, starting with the general fund and some special funds and all. And then we also have summary by department and fund. And so that's also listed there. And then behind all of those summaries, you can see, I'm in the summary. We've got this broken up by department here. So you can see, okay, for instance, Board of Aldermen, here it is, right? They're 110, so the first budget here. And it's actually just got by line item. Here's their budget by line item. There'll always be 2 years of actual data. The budget adopted of the current fiscal year, the budget request, and the budget adopted for well, that was for the previous fiscal year, FY23, and then the request for FY20, and then the current budget. And then also the personnel schedule supporting which is all the positions and the hirings for those various positions within each department is listed there. So that's the detail for like sort of the meat of the budget itself. And then in addition, we've got the capital improvements plan. There's a 5-year operating capital improvements plan approved each year. We typically have somewhat limited revenues available to capital. We've got some dedicated sources such as the half-cent sales tax and all. In our recent years, we've had one of the sources is that any operating surplus funds we have from the prior year. We've had benefit of having that for the last couple of years. So I do expect to have another series of meetings, both through the capital committee as well as the Citizens Advisory Committee, to review capital needs throughout the city. And that's a process that will parallel the budget process. So the capital improvements plan is incorporated into the budget each year. Revenue estimates, that has to, again, coincide with our budget estimates for the year, our expenditures. And so this is just similar to the line item detail for expenditures. This is a line item detail for our revenue estimates for the general fund and all the other special funds that exist in city government. Let's see here, what else we got. Oh, there, I also make a, well, here's the list. I mentioned the fact that when we do amendments to that process, I posted what those amendments were. You can see proposed changes to the budget, and there they were when they got approved. So that gets posted. And then, of course, I also do a overview, a budget presentation each year. With that, I make one to the Board of E&A, and if there are any changes, I subsequently make one to the Budget and Public Employees Committee. And here's the one that we made in May of this year, and it basically giving a lot of the summary information as well. So that gives you a little bit more context. And I think, was that it? In this final document, this was June, I mentioned that the E&A met to respond to requests from the Budget Committee for amendments. That's what this document was. They approved that. That went on to the Budget Committee, and those were the amendments that were approved at that time. So yeah, if you are interested in following each step, it's usually posted on our website in this box here, and you can see as it comes up each iteration of the budget process.
Great. Thank you for that, Paul. And for any attendees who are watching, I have dropped those links in the chat to both the budget division documents as well as the budget process online resource that Paul shared. So you have those as resources available to you as well. Paul, you mentioned quickly the Capital Committee. In case people who are watching are unaware of what that is, what its role is, can you talk about what that role is in the city's appropriation process?
Sure. The Capital Committee, I'm gonna pull this up. Let's see if I share a screen again. This is also online. The Capital Committee is comprised of 9 members of the various offices of the city government. As budget director, I serve as chair of that committee. We also have members of the appointed by the president of the Board of Aldermen, the mayor's office, the comptroller, and have a couple, and we have the CDA director, the president of the Board of Public Service, and then we do have a couple of members of the Board of Aldermen as appointees. And then we also, so it's a 9-member committee. It meets periodically to make recommendations regarding funding. But in addition to that, and some of this is dated, I should point out, because we haven't updated with the Board of Aldermen appointees yet, and we haven't brought that up, but we're going to be updating these lists. But there's a Citizens Advisory Committee as well, comprised of a number of citizen appointees of the members of the Board of Aldermen, Board of E&A, as well as the Board of Aldermen. Those would need to be appointed as well. Basically, to give you an idea about what kind of things we do here, and it's reviewing. Let me see if I can get materials. Let me go to all meeting materials. Things like the capital improvement needs inventory, often let me switch this here. Rotate. There we go. Going through Board of BPS, the Board of Public Service, and the president of the Board of Public Service is charged with identifying an inventory of capital needs for the citywide. And so one of the processes I mentioned in our budget process, going out to departments to see what they need from a capital needs standpoint. That kind of information is also forwarded to the Board of Public Service, so that they identify sort of a rolling inventory of some of our most critical needs from a capital improvement standpoint. What we've been doing in recent years, we've been sort of categorizing them from a critical to a needed and desirable, just to sort of give a priority, because there's always the list is always longer than any of the resources that we have available. But the way the process works,
is this information, is this by practice gathered? Is this these committees created by ordinance, or what? Like
the capital process is by ordinance. There are ordinances which both set what who is on the capital committee and what the process is. Now but basically the committee members were set by ordinance. The appointees to the Citizens Advisory Committee set by ordinance, and then the process of appropriations such that it is concurrent with our regular operating budget. That's also set by ordinance. But as I mentioned, in the last couple of years, and this is true anytime we have surplus revenues that we can appropriate. So for instance, this year we did a supplemental capital appropriation. I think it was in February, and that appropriated some of the additional surplus funds we had from the prior fiscal year. And that can be as well. We can do that whenever that we have that opportunity to do so. And that followed some recommendations from the Capital Committee, also following up on a series of meetings from the Citizens Advisory Committee, which identified priorities and things like that to give us an idea about where we wanted to allocate those revenues. And again, this is a lot of the guide work happens from these sort of inventory of needs that the Board of Public Service puts together each year. And so I expect that this process will begin after the first year as well, and so that we can get this done concurrently with the budget process.
Great, thank you for that, Paul. There's been some interest expressed in this by members of this working group in learning more about why the Board of Aldermen is not able to add new funding to the operating budget. I know Commissioner Grant had submitted a question that says, why does the current budgeting process under the city charter work better than if the Board of Aldermen had authority to increase budget items or create new ones? Are you able to speak to any of that?
Sure. I think that and I was researching this going back, I think before the charter before the last charter revision, which actually imposed this new, well, I call it new, but it was in 88. And I don't think there was a provision that actually allowed an increase at all. What the current version did was basically legislate that said any proposed increases need to be approved by the Board of E&A as well. Right? In practice, what that means is basically you are legislating the need for compromise. And when people ask me this, as I say, from a budget standpoint, there's almost always a bias for an increase, right? I mean, everybody wants to increase the budget. Nobody wants to decrease the budget. But cutting the budget, that's a pretty strong authority the Board of Aldermen has in being able to reduce. But you also want to make sure that any reduction is real in terms of, if you want to have an increase, it's something that I always bristle when I see, and I've seen this over the years, is that, oh, this is not a real cut, it's a fake cut in order to accommodate an increase over here. I think by the process we have now is that any reduction will have to be vetted in order to make sure that whatever proposed increase is a like increase and such. And I think, again, compromise, and it was thought out in advance where this proposed revision to the charter that was approved in 87 contemplated that, and basically it said it forced compromise between the parties. And I think that's a good thing. And I think that it has worked, and that it is made sure that proposals are vetted properly and such like that. And I think that's a positive development. I could envision in situations where it gets the budget process gets out of hand if it's not done properly, or if reductions are not of like manner of or matching to the particular proposed increase. And I think by having the fact that you have to go back to E&A, and E&A then reviews and vets these things, and it requires a bit of compromising and negotiating between the two bodies, you get the best result. And I think that has shown itself to be a workable and a working, successful conclusion to the budget process each year.
So Paul, I mean, it's that process having to go back to E&A to get approval for these increases. I mean, I don't know, I guess in your experience, I don't know to what extent you've compared systems at other cities or municipalities and how they compare. I mean, is that a unique system? Is that something that's mimicked in other cities?
Well, it's interesting in that we've also have a unique form of government as well. So we have Board of E&A is not something that's a common thing either. So I mean, but under the structure you got, you try to develop something that will work with the structure you have. And I think with what you have got right now, you do have such you have measures in place such that the Board of Aldermen can reduce the budget any time it would like. I mean, if it sees fit. But it also needs, if it wants to increase, it needs to negotiate with the Board of E&A in order to arrive at a compromise situation where you can come to an agreement on what you're going to increase. And I think that imposes a certain amount of fiscal discipline on both parties, such that each feels the need to be responsive to the other. And I think they are typically, but it also means that the solutions are vetted in a way that you get the
So would you be afraid if that current sort of guardrail of going back to E&A for approval was removed or diminished, that it could lead to a lack of fiscal discipline and result in, I guess, more spending than revenues are coming in?
That would be my inkling. Yeah, I would think. I think that is I think it's a good practice to have to go and think about it some more in terms of going back between the two bodies to get things where they have them vetted in that process a little more. I think it could get a little. I could envision a scenario where it gets a little out of hand if reductions aren't real, or reductions are with the desire to increase something. You may want to the reduction may not be of like kind or even a legitimate reduction in order to achieve a certain increase. Whereas if you're working among the two bodies, you're going to find the best solution to achieve what it is that I think the elected officials want to achieve. And I think it's been demonstrated over the last 30 plus years that this amendment has been operating, that that's the case.
So another question that was raised in a slightly, not slightly, but different topic is explain the current budgeting process for mid-year spending that requires new appropriations. How is that done? For instance, if an ordinance passes that requires spending over the costs that were appropriated for a budgeted line item, or if an expected cost arises, who has the authority to incur that cost and how is that handled?
Okay. Well, that's actually a good question, because that comes up sometimes. It worries me sometimes when I'll see an ordinance and I think, wait a minute, has this been thought through to where, because whether it's a contract or whether it's an ordinance or anything, everything is subject to appropriation. So while there can be an ordinance that says we will create this new thing, that new thing is going to be subject to appropriation regardless. So if the money is not there, then it won't happen until it gets incorporated in the budget the following year or something like that. But there has to be an appropriation to go with any new responsibility or new service. Now, there are instances where you can say, okay, we've identified funds that will not be used in one department or another. And as I mentioned, you can either do it by ordinance reappropriating funds, or you can do budget transfers. So as I mentioned in the budget transfers, where you've identified funds that might not be spent in one department, we can transfer those to another department for covering those costs. So there are mechanisms you can do to adjust that. In the instance of, I mentioned earlier, a new tax comes into play. For instance, a new sales tax, something like that, where it will generate revenues, and that's not in the budget. Then you can appropriate those also as well, but that'd be a supplemental appropriation to the budget ordinance, and then you can appropriate those specifically. Now, again, I think it's also important to consider on the flip side, what happens when revenues start falling, and you also have to amend the budget downwards, because that's occurred. I mean, we've seen recessions, as I mentioned, 08, 09. You also have to keep that in mind. Our first line of attack on that is, again, mostly going to departments and say, okay, we're going to try to limit the expenditures. You don't hire people, and then you also do that. But on occasion, as I mentioned in 2008 and 2009, we did have to go back and say we have to reappropriate some, we have to defer some capital expenses and reappropriate those funds, which we did. And so those are the kind of mechanisms, either by ordinance or by budget transfers, that we have available to address changes during the fiscal year.
Perfect. Thank you so much for that, Paul. Are there any follow-up questions for that one? Okay. Moving on to the next question. What discretion does a department have to move money that's already been budgeted within a department, for instance, to hire more personnel or to incur an unexpected cost like buying a new refuse truck, for example?
Okay. Well, during the fiscal year, we get quite a number of, as I mentioned, budgetary transfer requests for different items. So for instance, let's say a department says something breaks, they need a new copier or something like that, which it wasn't in the budget, but it's unanticipated and they need to, and that happens all the time, and that can be expected. And if they're underspending in a particular account, they say, hey, we'd like to move some money from this account over to this in order to cover that. That's pretty well, I mean, that's usually not a problem. You know, we can accommodate that. We do look a little bit more intently on items that would have a recurring impact. So you mentioned personnel, things like that. Now in certain departments, you could add a person, change their personnel schedule to add a position, and in the meantime reduce a position. Sometimes they're adding positions for new things as well, for new items. But we look at those a little more closely because that has an impact on not only the current budget, but the subsequent budgets, theoretically. So if you hire a person, that's not going to be a one-time cost, it's a recurring cost. So we try to in those instances, I know it's not always possible, but we try to say, okay, well, if this position's needed, can we substitute it from another position? Because those are that's a like cost. That's not always possible. It might be something new. But if that's the case, then we need to be aware of that so that when we're preparing the subsequent budget, we'll know, okay, their cost just went up and there's likely to be an impact on next year's budget. So that's, they're not all equal, but that's a department typically will work within its own appropriation to address the needs during the fiscal year. And we try to be accommodating in that regard.
Okay. Any follow-up questions from the commissioners on this one? Okay. And then next question is, what impediments are there in the current charter to sound budgeting? What improvements could be made to improve the budgeting process?
You know, I don't know about the charter so much, because as I mentioned, I thought the charter reform that they did back then was probably one of the best things they did. So process-wise, I also often hear comments about, well, they don't have enough time, like on the Board of Aldermen, not enough time and things like that. But I would encourage looking at the schedule that perhaps they could start earlier in that process, because they do have all May and June to do it. And oftentimes, I know this year was a transition year, but if you start in the middle of May, well, you've lost 2 weeks of your schedule, right? So that's 25% of the time you have allotted. So you typically know it's coming. So some way of starting that earlier might relieve some of that feeling of, hey, we have to rush through it. Well, you do have some extra time there that's sort of going by the wayside, because I know we'll be ready for it. I mean, we can present any time because we'll be ready to present because we'll have the budget done by E&A by May 1st. So that might help some that previously stated need for time in terms of on the aldermanic hearings. Other processes, yeah, not from a charter standpoint. Right now, I'm more working on trying to get accommodated with the new accounting system and all, and getting data that I need to get on that timely fashion. So it's more of an inside baseball type things that we're dealing with right now, but not from a legislative process. I can't think of anything right now.
Any follow-up questions to that? Oh, Reginald, you unmuted.
Yes, I did. Thank you for your presentation, Director Payne. Kind of familiarize myself with the process, and of course I was looking at the during your process, I was trying to follow along and just kind of keep up with what's going on with because we all got copies of the budget and the annual operation, so that was given to us as commissioners, and so I'm just kind of looking through that. You made mention about scheduling, and I know that with the way the election schedule falls, whenever there's there's new incoming, say, alders, or if there is a new mayor or what have you, it's like it's like the minute they take their hand off of being sworn in, and now it's, hey, welcome to budget season, and now you're thrown into that. And so I'm glad that you mentioned the scheduling. The question, I guess, becomes, and this may be more of a general charter question, or general commission question, and that is, could more time be allotted if there is enough? I guess the best word I can use right now is space between from when the elections happen, because remember, general elections happen in April, and then, like you said, you have May, so now there's this mad dash to get everything done. So would moving that date work, or is that more of a, when you say needing more time, is that more of like moving the budget calendar? I mean, I'm just trying to get a clear understanding as to how we can allow for more time in those periods where, like, because you have odd year aldermanic elections versus the even year and all of that.
When I was talking about more time, what I would just as a matter of practice every year, it seems like there's some dead time in that process.
Mm-hmm.
The dead time is always May 1st to like May 15th or 14th, whatever. And there's a couple of weeks in there when we're really not doing much related to the budget itself, because the budget's been presented, it's been adopted by the Board of E&A, it's been submitted to the Board of Aldermen, it's been introduced. I guess it's introduced in a number of days after, whatever. But there's not much activity going on in that first week or two of May. And I'm thinking if there's more time needed, I'm just thinking more of the Board of Aldermen's process. If there's more time needed in that process, they maybe move up, even if it's more organizational rather than delving in. Mm-hmm. That you can get some of that stuff done before, and that might, even an additional week is pretty substantial on that. So I was just thinking, as a matter of practice, I've just seen that over the years. That's typically how it's been going, and I was thinking, well, heck, if you want more time, that's there's a window there for getting that without changing anything.
Gotcha.
So I think we've run through the list of questions that the commission had developed, whether in previous meetings or that have been submitted, or for the purpose of this one. Are there any additional questions that commissioners have? Okay. Well, we do have a few folks who are attendees, and we've got about 9 minutes left in our scheduled time. So did want to open up the opportunity for either public testimony or some public questions. We look to have two participants. What I will do is, let's see here. Let me see if I can get the view of everyone. Say, if folks would like to make a comment or ask a question, would you please raise your hand? Okay, so we have two people, both of whom raised their hands. We'll go in alphabetical order by last name. First person, Charles Bryson. I'm going to go ahead and allow you to talk. We'll go ahead and do 3 minutes since we have another panelist. So Charles, you are now able to unmute and comment, question, whatever you'd like. Go ahead.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the last part. It was a comment or question? Is that-
Oh, just a comment or question, and go ahead. Floor is yours.
Okay, thank you. 3 minutes, correct?
Yes, yeah.
Okay, I'll be brief. Hi, Paul. Good to see you. So, dear working group members of the Charter Commission, my name is Charles Bryson. I'm policy catalyst for TrailNet, which is a 34-year-old regional nonprofit concerned with safe streets, which include transportation issues. The future of transportation in the city of St. Louis must be looked in a much different way than inception of our city or when we had the highest population. At one point, the city had 800,000. Today, it might have 290,000. However, our streets have never been downsized to reflect the change, making many of them too wide and thereby promoting speeding and destructive driving. The city also has an issue with many departments conducting policy and practice over street and sidewalk programming. The Streets Department, the Board of Public Service, and the Department of Planning all have a role to play with respect to our streets and sidewalks. So much so that residents and frankly even aldermen have to make a number of calls to determine who is the proper contact for their status of their street or sidewalk work order, repair, or plan for the use of ward capital. TrailNet is therefore requesting the Charter Commission place as one of its highest priorities the formation of a city Department of Transportation on the ballot in November 2024. The request is not to demean nor diminish the work of the current Streets Department, the Board of Public Service, or the Department of Planning. It is, however, to acknowledge the change in times and the need to incorporate all elements in the planning, construction, and maintenance into one department. The city needs a complete streets philosophy and practice approach with one city department that takes all things into consideration, all forms of transportation, people who walk, people who use public transportation, people who bike and commute, and obviously those who drive. There are a number of other cities, and I can get you that information, a number of other cities of different sizes and challenges that have recently changed from streets department or public works departments into a transportation department. I will share this with you in a July 17th memo that summarizes and analyzes these streets to transportation departments in such cities as Denver, Pittsburgh, Philadelphia, Oakland, Boston, and Austin, Texas. A conclusion of the memo that I will be providing you states transportation should no longer be viewed as a maintenance activity. Cities need individuals inside of City Hall or inside of a transportation department to champion the move toward a multimodal transportation and infrastructure system. More importantly, an overarching and cohesive vision is needed rather than individuals in different departments working separately or internal agendas from day-to-day tasks. TrailNet, and I dare say many in the community, believe that this is to be true. Our streets must become multimodal, they must become complete streets, and transportation for all. We must have a complete system. With that, I thank you for your time. I would be interested in answering any calls, any other questions that you might have.
Great.
Thank
Thank you
you.
so much, Charles. Yeah, does anybody have any follow-up questions or comments? Charles, one thing, I'm gonna drop the email address for the Charter Commission inbox in the chat. If you wouldn't mind sending that memo there. And I know, I believe, Liz Kramer with the Community Mobility Commission, I know that you guys tend to work, on a lot of similar issues, had flagged that there was a charter focused report that I believe the CMC and the collective was going to be sending as well. I don't know if that's been submitted yet, and I don't know if you would have any awareness of whether that's been shared with the commission yet.
It probably depends on who the next speaker is getting ready to be.
Got it. Okay, cool. All right, well, we can follow up separately with Liz because I know that there was a lot of interest expressed after that public testimony at the last full meeting. But yeah, I think that I would hope that I speak on behalf of the working group when I say that we're very much appreciative of this memo and your guys' willingness to share it. And, there's a lot of interest in this topic. And for your awareness too, I know in December, this working group is trying to look at setting up meetings, similar informational meetings with other city departments of priority interest. BPS and streets would not have been flagged as some of those departments. So as those meetings get noticed up, they'll be posted online. And I do believe I have your email address. So once we get any of those set up, I'll be sure to let you guys know in case you want to present at those meetings as well.
Thank you. Much appreciated. Thank you.
Of course. Okay. Well, I'm going to, let's see here, remove you. And then Dawn, I'm going to move you over. Let's see, promoting you to panelist and allowing you to talk. Remove. Okay. All right, Dawn, you're welcome to unmute and share comments whenever you're ready.
Hello, thank you for the space for public comment. Charles was a little vague about his answer because actually I am the author of the report that you were referring to. I had planned to speak on transportation like Charles because I was under the impression that this meeting was to discuss the Board of Public Service. I didn't realize that the agenda had changed until yesterday and had not yet seen the opportunity to speak, so I came anyway. So on to my comment. This summer, between terms as a Master's of Urban and Regional Planning student at Portland State University, I researched how the city could be updated, how the city charter could be updated so the city can provide its residents with safe and accessible mobility options. I did email my findings to the Charter Commission, and I'm happy to stay in contact to answer any questions either today or later on. Just to summarize my findings, since the implementation of the St. Louis City Charter, our urban environment has experienced significant changes. However, the charter has fallen behind in keeping up. Incremental updates have proven inadequate, especially in addressing critical issues relating to mobility and transportation. The largest issue is that our current transportation framework lacks comprehensiveness, and presently the Board of Public Service, the Streets Department, and the Planning Department all contribute to creating spaces for transportation and addressing land development, but are disjointed in their operations. By aligning these departments more closely, we can bridge the gap between immediate transportation goals and long-term land use planning, fostering a more sustainable and equitable urban environment. A model worth considering is Denver, where transforming their Department of Public Works into the Department of Transportation and Infrastructure, they have yielded significant improvements in their transportation network. There's an opportunity to think about creating a Department of Transportation here in St. Louis, so city officials can plan, design, build, and maintain our streets, sidewalks, bike lanes, and other transportation networks better. Additionally, there are gaps in our charter currently concerning the current state of transportation. Notably, the charter does not explicitly address public transportation, a critical oversight hindering effective management of our transit systems. Collaborative efforts between Metro Transit and the City of St. Louis are vital for cohesive infrastructure developments and service routes. Updating the charter to include provisions mandating such collaboration is essential for building a more interconnected and efficient transportation network. Additionally, the charter's lack of emphasis on the maintenance of pedestrian and bike infrastructure is evident. As substantial investments like Board Bill 120 and the Tower Grove Connector are made, it is crucial for the charter to clearly assign responsibilities and funding for the upkeep of sidewalks and bike lanes. Clarity regarding the department responsible for maintenance would ensure a more equitable distribution of resources and a safer environment for all residents. Moreover, the requirements for the Department of Streets director has unintentionally restricted the pool of eligible candidates, mandating that the director be an engineer with at least 10 years of technical training overlooks evolving skill sets crucial for effective urban management and design, such as long-term planning, project management, and community engagement. Following the examples of cities like Denver, Cleveland, and Kansas City, we should simplify these requirements to allow greater flexibility in selecting individuals to lead our city's infrastructure development. By updating our charter to align with the needs of our modern city, we can establish a more accessible, sustainable, and equitable urban landscape for generations to come. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Dawn, and how fortuitous to have you as an attendee in light of the earlier question. Yeah, I know that was something that caught the attention of a lot of commissioners. Does anyone have any questions for Dawn?
I have one question for both. And first of all, I apologize. My power went out on my laptop there briefly. So I'm sorry I missed all of Ms. Walters' comments, but I think I got the tenor. But so my question on this is how I think this is a very interesting idea, but since public transit is operated by a regional entity, not the city, how much good will actually a department in the city do as far as creating like a comprehensive vision or a cohesive vision like you talked about?
Charles, would you like to answer or should I? Or is Charles able to answer? If not, I can.
And say I can allow him to talk. If you want to take the first stab at it while I get Charles added into the conversation.
Absolutely. So wonderful question and a great item to clarify.
Did we just lose?
We might have. Dawn, if you're speaking, we can't hear you anymore.
Currently, unless they choose to reach out to the city of St. Louis, they do not tell the city what improvements they are going to make. And so often they will make improvements to or decide on a bus stop, and that bus stop will not have a sidewalk, will not be accessible by a sidewalk, may have a sidewalk that goes absolutely nowhere. And additionally, the city of St. Louis can create improvements to certain transit stops, such as bumping out the sidewalk so that the bus does not need to go off the street in order to pick people up and then go back on, which improves the time of bus pickup and drop off. But Metro Transit cannot make those improvements themselves because they don't own the roads. And so transforming the Department of Streets to a Department of Transportation would allow these two entities to collaborate better to improve both the built environment and transit service.
And I would agree with what Dawn said. I think the other thing is we don't necessarily talk about bi-state when we're talking about a Department of Transportation, but we are talking about a multimodal system that must fit and work together. So whether you're talking about, as Dawn said, streets and sidewalks, but also where they're placed, where the bus shelters are placed, but also what other multimodal issues arise that the city can use to incorporate. And that may include bike lanes and the maintenance thereof. It might include the Tower Grove connector, which is being done. So there's a whole host of issues that a multimodal system through a Department of Transportation can both philosophize and put into practice. So it's not necessarily just talking about bi-state, but what other multimodal systems are other cities using that we can incorporate in the work that we do. And making sure that we are maintaining it, and whoever is to maintain it, whatever department, is identified in the charter so everyone knows that that is part of their job, duty, and responsibility.
Thank you both so much for that. Commissioner Grant, did you have any follow-up questions? No, okay. I think one question I had, I don't know if either of you are able to speak to this, given your research, when we're considering, recommendations for structural reform, creation of new departments that merge others, what has that time frame looked like in other cities that have done this? I mean, is it a year? Is it 2 years? What has that process looked like for everything to kind of shift into the new paradigm?
Well, I would say,
Oh, go ahead,
uh,
Charles.
go- I would say it this way. 90% of what I think we might be asking for already exists. It is the planning process, number one, and the construction. For example, why is it that the streets department can say we want construction on a particular street, we want uh, paving, etc., but that is then farmed out to the BPS for them to do the contract work. Why should that not just be in house? So you're really just, I would say, most of what we would be talking about, I should say, most of what I'm talking about already exists. It's those ancillary things that planning does, that BPS does, that should be brought in house. And then, as Dawn talked about, make sure it is enumerated in the law. This is what the streets department, now Department of Transportation, is supposed to take care of.
So in essence, then what the both of you are talking about, which I absolutely love this idea, is really just the opportunity for better collaboration as well as I'm losing my train of thought right now, but definitely a means of collaboration and planning, because it does seem you have an idea, then it goes to one person, but then it has to go through another. It's too much of, kind of passing the buck or kicking the can. I kind of like, I like the idea of the all-in-one stop shop where it's like everyone's there and everyone's kind of collaborating and working to make transportation in the streets better for the citizens of St. Louis.
That's exactly right. I studied, like I mentioned in my comment, I studied Denver, and what truly happened within Denver, and this happened within, I think it took 2 years to figure out exactly how they wanted to do it, and then to bring it to voters, and then they were able to quickly make that change. Because once again, what you were referring to is that, and what Charles was referring to is they had the capacity. It just was a matter of reorganization to optimize collaboration. But they had a similar setup where the board of their public works oversaw the streets department, and the streets department was the division of the board of public works. And what they instead did was they elevated basically the Department of Streets into the Department of Transportation and made that the primary focus, and moved the board of public works, which still operates and still does sewers and things like that within Denver, but made that a division of Department of Transportation. And they also moved some planners from their planning division into the Department of Transportation, so that when the Department of Streets realizes, oh, this street needs to be maintained, they're not sending that work to another department. They have planners in and engineers in their department that are able to do that work and continue it on without having to cross over to another section of the city. I go more in detail in my report as well on their process as well.
So yeah, I'd like to see that report. And
Absolutely. I can't wait to read it.
I guess
I emailed, sorry, excuse me.
Okay. So I know our next work group meetings in December are focusing on the Board of Public Service, right? So which a lot of these departments are housed in. And I think me on the Charter Commission here, I'm trying to figure out what impediments there are in the current charter to something like you're proposing. I mean, there are provisions in the current charter under the article on the Board of Public Service that specifically permit the various departments to cooperate with each other to assign employees from one department to another. So there seems to be some mechanism to accomplish what you're proposing already, but I mean, I would like to hear from the Board of Public Service about this idea as well. You know, does it have to be more intentional in the sense of creating a Department of Transportation, or can this be done under the current charter?
Well, I would beg to say that we're talking a little bit more than cooperation. The Department of Transportation needs to run the Department of Transportation, the streets, the sidewalks. In fact, the sidewalks are not part of the streets department currently. It's part of the Board of Public Service. So if I'm a new resident or even old resident and I've got a concern about my sidewalks, I don't call the streets department. I call BPS. I don't. Why does that make any sense? I don't know. But to me, all things streets and sidewalks, all things regarding any sort of transportation, whether you're talking about streets, I'm sorry, you're talking about feet, where you're talking about cars, strollers, anything ought to be in a Department of Transportation, because ultimately everything that department does is about moving bodies from point A to point B and back.
I will also add that I know in my report I focused on Denver, but many cities across the country that are seen as leading the transportation field have this sort of system of a Department of Transportation. Chicago, Pittsburgh, Charlotte, Portland, all have departments of transportation, and so luckily, we won't have to reinvent the wheel here. We can definitely take best practices from elsewhere to create a well-functioning department.
Well, thank you for your comments.
Thank you for
Yeah.
your comments. Thank you for what you presented. I'm looking forward to again reading your report and everything on that.
Yeah, and so the fellow commissioners are aware. I just checked with the Google Drive that the commission staff have put together. I'm not seeing that report in there. So what I'll do after this meeting is I'll send an email to the commission staff, make sure all of our working groups included on it, and just see if that's available, or if it can be uploaded. And hopefully we can get access to it that way. Well, yes, thank you both to Charles Bryson, John Walter, for your comments tonight, for sticking around to share that insight. And of course, Paul, thank you so much for making time to educate us. That was a wealth of information, touched on so many different aspects of the budget process in the city and different roles. No, I think that was, a very generous amount of information, and we very much appreciate your time. Does anybody else have any questions for Paul before we adjourn for the night? Okay, all right. Well, seeing no further business, motion to adjourn.
I'll make
So moved.
Oh, look at that eager 1-2 combo right there. Okay, thank you so much, everybody, for your time tonight. And everybody have a wonderful Thanksgiving holiday with your family and loved ones and friends. And we will look forward to the next working group meeting, which will hopefully be as enlightening as this one is.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank